White billionaire, family humiliates, black CEO, seconds later, she ends their $5. 9. B. Lifeline. Hello everyone, before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Get out, now. The words cracked through the grand hall like a whip against marble. Conversations died mid-laugh. Crystal glasses froze inches from painted lips. Beneath the vaulted ceiling, arches layered in stone, statues of forgotten gods watching from their plinths, a white-haired woman in black lace pointed a rigid finger at the lone figure standing at the center of the room. "You don't belong here," she continued, voice sharpened by entitlement. "People like you never do." The black woman in the yellow gown did not flinch. She stood tall, arms folded across her chest, the silk catching the light like a quiet flame against a sea of black tuxedos and midnight dresses. Her posture was still, composed, as if the insult had struck the air beside her and fallen harmlessly to the floor. A ripple moved through the crowd, first shock, then something uglier. Phones rose, screens glowed. The moment transformed from cruelty into spectacle. A man near the columns angled his camera for a better shot. A woman whispered, laughing behind her hand. No one stepped forward. Silence became consent. The matriarch took a step closer, heels clicking with ceremonial authority. Diamonds at her throat glittered like frozen tears. "Security," she said loudly, savoring the word. "Escort this distraction out of my event." The hall smelled of old money and polished stone. It was a charity gala hosted inside a museum wing reserved for donors whose names were carved into plaques no one read anymore. Tonight was supposed to be tasteful, controlled. Instead, it had turned into a public execution without blood. The woman in yellow lifted her chin slightly, eyes steady, not angry, not hurt, observant. She scanned the faces around her, some smug, some uncomfortable, some eager to capture every second. She recognized a few. CEOs, board members, benefactors whose foundations quietly depended on checks signed by people they never bothered to learn. A security guard hesitated at the edge of the room, unsure whether to move. The matriarch snapped her fingers. "Well?" The pause stretched. You could hear the faint hum of the buildings, climate control, the distant echo of footsteps in another gallery. The black woman remained motionless, as if the command had not been issued to her at all. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Ariana Cole. Ariana's gaze returned to the woman pointing at her. The crowd waited for a reaction, an apology, an explanation, a raised voice. None came. Instead, Ariana slowly uncrossed her arms, smoothing the fabric of her gown with deliberate care. The gesture unsettled the room. It wasn't defiance. It was ownership. "You're embarrassing yourself," the matriarch said, lowering her voice but not her cruelty. "Leave before you make this worse." Ariana looked past her, toward the towering statues lining the hall. Men cast in stone, empires immortalized long after their rot had been forgotten. She thought of how many rooms like this had been built on exclusion, then renamed philanthropy. A murmur spread. Someone whispered, "Who is she?" Another replied, "Does it matter?" A third voice, quiet, uneasy, said, "It might." Ariana reached into her clutch and felt the smooth edge of her phone. No rush, no drama, just confirmation. The screen lit her face for half a second, reflecting in her eyes like a coming storm held back by discipline. The matriarch scoffed. "Calling someone?" she sneered. "Good. Call a driver." Ariana met her stare, calm, measured, the kind of calm that made men in power miscalculate. Around them, the crowd leaned in, phones adjusted focus. A few smiles faltered. Something about the stillness felt wrong, like the air before a sudden drop. No one in that room knew it yet, but the order that governed their laughter was already cracking. The insult had been delivered. The spectacle had begun, and the consequences, silent, procedural, and irreversible, were already moving. To anyone watching from the edges of that grand hall, the white billionaire family looked untouchable. They always did. They stood beneath museum skylights and centuries-old arches as if history itself had been built to frame them. Men in tailored tuxedos, women draped in silk and diamonds, their laughter calibrated to sound effortless. Their name was etched into donor plaques, whispered by curators, printed on gala invitations with a reverence that bordered on fear. This was the Halstead family. Old money, East Coast lineage. A fortune born generations ago and carefully repackaged as permanence. At the center of it all stood Margaret Halstead, the matriarch. White hair pinned perfectly into place, black lace sleeves clinging to her arms like a uniform. She ruled charity boards and social circles the way generals once ruled battalions, through exclusion, through memory, through the quiet understanding that crossing her meant vanishing from rooms like this forever. Margaret believed hierarchy was a natural law. Some people were meant to be seen, others were meant to serve, and every so often someone needed to be reminded of their place. Her husband, Richard Halstead, stood several feet behind her, smiling when expected, nodding when required. To the outside world, he was the architect of the family empire, a titan of finance whose real estate holdings once defined skylines. But inside, the truth gnawed at him. The empire was bleeding. Years of over-leveraged expansions, quiet regulatory pressure, loans rolled over one too many times, properties valued on confidence instead of cash flow. What looked like generational strength was, in reality, a structure held together by timing and denial. Tonight mattered more than anyone knew, because somewhere beneath the champagne toasts and string quartets, a $5.9 billion Lifeline hovered in limbo. A deal not yet announced, not yet signed. A refinancing structure so delicate that even a whisper in the wrong direction could collapse it. Without it, banks would pull back, credit would freeze, and within days, the Halstead name would become something no amount of philanthropy could cleanse. Their children, Daniel and Claire, floated nearby, absorbed in their own reflections. Daniel laughed too loudly, drink always in hand, filming moments for an audience that existed only online. Claire smiled with surgical precision, already calculating which connections would be useful once the evening was over. Neither of them knew the full picture. They had never needed to. For their entire lives, money had arrived on time. Problems had been solved off stage. Consequences had been redirected toward people without last names worth protecting, and that was why none of them recognized danger when it stood in front of them. Margaret saw only a black woman in a yellow gown who did not belong to her world. Someone who disrupted the visual order she had spent decades policing. Someone who, by refusing to shrink, had committed an unforgivable social crime. She had no idea that the woman she was pointing at, commanding security to remove, was the single variable her family could not afford to antagonize. Richard felt something tighten in his chest as phones came out and laughter thinned. Not guilt, instinct. The kind that arrives just before collapse. He searched the room, scanning faces for reassurance, for signs that this humiliation was still controllable, that it was just another spectacle he could smooth over with influence and a well-timed donation. But the stillness at the center of the room unsettled him. The woman in yellow did not argue, did not plead, did not perform. She observed, and for the first time that night, Richard Halstead wondered briefly, uncomfortably, whether the family had just mistaken silence for weakness. They had built their entire legacy on that assumption, and it had never failed them before, until now. Ariana Cole had arrived without ceremony. No entourage, no press, no visible security detail announcing her importance. She stepped out of a nondescript black car on the museum steps, the city's evening noise fading behind her like a door closing. The yellow gown she wore was custom, understated in its precision, no logo, no excess, elegance without explanation. It was intentional. Ariana had learned long ago that rooms like this revealed more truth when people believed you were invisible. As she entered the gala, the temperature of attention shifted almost imperceptibly. Heads turned, then turned away. A few glances lingered too long, measuring her presence against unspoken rules. She felt it instantly, the familiar resistance of spaces built to exclude and polished to deny it. She didn't announce herself. She never did. For the past 20 years, Ariana had made a career out of operating behind layers law firms, holding companies, shell structures so clean they looked like coincidence. She preferred boardrooms where her name appeared only in footnotes, and deals where her signature arrived last, quiet and final. To the public, she barely existed. To the global financial system, she was unavoidable. Ariana Cole was the founder and CEO of Cole Global Capital, a private investment firm whose reach extended far beyond what headlines suggested. Infrastructure, real estate, logistics, debt restructuring. When companies were declared too complex to fail, her team was often already inside the books, deciding whether they deserved to survive. She didn't buy companies for vanity. She bought leverage. And tonight, she was here because leverage had finally requested a face. The Halstead deal had come to her 6 months earlier, disguised as an opportunity, leaking desperation through immaculate paperwork. A $5.9 billion refinancing designed to stabilize a crumbling empire without ever admitting it had begun to fall. Ariana had recognized the signs immediately. Overexposure, inflated valuations, a family clinging to legacy while mistaking familiarity for safety. The kind of structure that collapsed not from one bad decision, but from arrogance repeated too long. She had agreed to consider it, on one condition: no announcements, no names, no assumptions. She would attend the gala as an observer. A final measure of character before capital moved. It wasn't about risk. She had already priced that in. It was about dignity. As Ariana stood now at the center of the hall, facing a woman who believed she had the authority to erase her with a gesture, memories flickered not as pain, but as data. The bank manager who'd asked if she was there on behalf of someone else. The investor who'd spoken only to her assistant. The boardroom where her projections were praised once they were repeated by a man with less experience and more volume. She had learned something crucial from those moments. People reveal their ethics before they reveal their intelligence. Around her, the room buzzed with miscalculation. Phones rose higher, laughter sharpened. The matriarch's voice cut through it all, certain, rehearsed, cruel. "You don't belong here." Ariana almost smiled. Not because it hurt, because it confirmed everything. She looked at the people surrounding her, faces shed seen on earnings calls. Men whose companies were quietly leveraged through her funds. Women whose foundations relied on grants that traced back, inevitably, to her approvals. They didn't recognize her, but they depended on her. And that, she knew, was the most dangerous position of all. Her phone rested in her hand now, the screen dark, waiting. Not for instructions, but for alignment. The systems behind it were already awake. Legal teams on standby. Financial triggers mapped and approved weeks ago. All that remained was intent. Across the room, Richard Halstead watched her with growing unease. Something in her stillness unsettled him. She wasn't reacting the way people were supposed to. She wasn't scrambling, wasn't shrinking, wasn't trying to earn her place. She was evaluating the room as if it belonged to her. Because, in ways no one there yet understood, it did. And the family that believed they were hosting the night had no idea they were standing inside the final interview of their own survival. The deal was never meant to be discussed out loud. Not in rooms like this. Not over champagne and applause. It existed in the shadows inside encrypted folders, behind non-disclosure agreements thick enough to suffocate truth. A $5.9 billion refinancing structure designed to do one thing and one thing only: keep the Halstead empire breathing without anyone noticing it had been on life support for years. Banks had already lost patience. Private lenders had tightened terms. Ratings agencies were circling. The margin for error had shrunk to something razor-thin and unforgiving. One missed obligation, one public disruption, one sponsor pulling back at the wrong moment, and the entire structure would unravel. That was why tonight mattered. The gala wasn't just a social event. It was a signal, a carefully staged proof of stability meant to reassure partners who were growing nervous and creditors who were quietly preparing exits. The message was simple. We're still powerful. We're still untouchable. Look around. And the most important person connected to that message was standing alone in the center of the room, being told to leave. Richard Halstead knew the numbers by heart. He knew how many days remained before liquidity tightened beyond repair. He knew which lenders were holding back, waiting for confirmation. He knew that one digital signature, one final approval, would unlock the funds that kept his family solvent, his legacy intact, his name clean. That signature had not yet been given, because the final authority sat with a single entity, Cole Global Capital. And Cole Global did not rush decisions. Ariana had insisted on a delay after the preliminary terms were agreed upon. A pause, a period of observation. Her legal team had framed it as procedural caution. Her analysts had called it risk mitigation. In truth, it was something else entirely. Character assessment. She wanted to see how the Halsteads behaved when they thought no one important was watching, how they treated people without leverage, how they exercised power when it cost them nothing, how quickly cruelty surfaced when entitlement went unchallenged. Tonight had been designed as that test. Richard's phone vibrated in his pocket, an update from his CFO he didn't open. He didn't need to. The tension in his chest told him enough. He glanced toward the bar, toward the donors, toward the cameras still rolling. Everything depended on appearances holding. Margaret Halstead, however, felt none of this. She had never seen balance sheets bleed, never sat across from lenders who smiled while sharpening knives. Her power lived elsewhere, in reputation, in access, in the ability to decide who belonged. And right now, she was exercising it. "You're delaying the evening," she snapped, voice pitched for maximum humiliation. "This is not a discussion. You will leave." She believed she was protecting her family. In reality, she was severing its last artery. Ariana listened without interruption. Behind her calm expression, timelines aligned, triggers synchronized, legal contingencies already drafted shifted from conditional to imminent. The deal documents sat unsigned, hovering in a digital queue that could just as easily dissolve as execute. The difference came down to one decision, not from the Halsteads, from her. Around them, the room leaned closer. Some sensed drama. Others sensed danger. A few, very few, felt the gravity of something irreversible approaching. Richard took a step forward, instinct screaming now. "Margaret," he said quietly, attempting control without explanation. "Perhaps—" She cut him off with a glance. "I've handled this." That was the moment. The lifeline still existed. The funds were still accessible. The empire had not yet collapsed, but it was no longer safe. Ariana felt the weight of it settle not as anger, not as revenge, but as clarity. This was not about punishment, it was about responsibility. Power, once witnessed, demanded response. And as she looked at the woman pointing at her, at the family depending on silence to survive, Ariana understood something with perfect precision. The deal was no longer viable. Not because the numbers failed, but because the people did. And with that realization, the $5.9 billion lifeline so desperately needed, so carefully hidden, hung suspended on the edge of extinction, waiting for the word that would decide whether it lived or disappeared forever. The breaking point did not arrive loudly. It never did. It came wrapped in confidence, delivered by someone who had never learned the cost of being wrong. Margaret Halstead stepped closer, invading Ariana's space with the practiced ease of a woman accustomed to obedience. Her voice dropped low enough to feel intimate, sharp enough to wound. "You should be grateful we've tolerated you this long," she said. "This institution is built on standards, on refinement. And people like you," she paused, letting the implication finish the sentence. "People like you are guests at best." A few nervous laughs escaped the crowd. Not approval, relief. The relief of people glad they weren't the target. Ariana felt it then. Not anger, not embarrassment, finality. The word tolerated settled into the room like dust on a coffin lid. It wasn't just an insult. It was a verdict. A declaration that humanity itself was conditional here, granted only when it matched expectation. Behind Margaret, Richard's face had gone pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Years of avoidance had trained him well. If he didn't intervene, perhaps the moment would pass. Perhaps Ariana would leave. Perhaps the deal would survive on momentum alone, but moments like this didn't pass. They crystallized. A security guard finally stepped forward, hand hovering uncertainly near Ariana's arm. "Mom," he said, quietly, apologetically, "if you could come with me." Ariana turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. He froze. There was nothing threatening in her expression. No challenge. No demand. Just certainty. The kind that didn't ask permission and didn't need volume. "It's all right," Ariana said softly. "I'm not going anywhere yet." The guard hesitated, then stepped back, unsure why his body had obeyed her instead of the woman who signed his checks. Margaret exhaled sharply, offended. "This is unbelievable," she snapped. "You're making a scene." Ariana looked around the room slowly, at the cameras, the statues, the donors who had mistaken cruelty for tradition. "No," she replied evenly. "You did that." The words landed without force and without escape. For the first time that night, Margaret's smile faltered. "You think this is clever?" she said. "You think posture makes you important?" Ariana reached into her clutch. Not dramatically, not hurried, just enough to retrieve her phone. The movement alone shifted the atmosphere. Phones in the crowd adjusted instinctively, mirroring her. A ripple of anticipation passed through the room not because they understood what was coming, but because instinct told them something irreversible had been set in motion. Richard felt his pulse spike. "Margaret," he said again, louder now. "That's enough." She ignored him. "You don't scare me," Margaret said to Ariana. "You're no one." Ariana unlocked her screen. The light reflected briefly across her face, illuminating eyes that were no longer observing but deciding. "You're right," she said quietly. "I don't scare you." She glanced at Richard then. "Just once. But the consequences will." There was no satisfaction in her voice, no triumph, only resolve. She scrolled once, tapped twice. A secure interface opened names, timestamps, approvals already queued, weeks of preparation, waiting for a single confirmation. Around them, the room leaned in, sensing drama but missing the truth entirely. This wasn't a confrontation. It was an execution procedural, lawful, and absolute. Margaret laughed, brittle and dismissive. "Go on," she said. "Call whoever you like." Ariana looked back at her. "I am." Her thumb hovered for a fraction of a second. In that pause lived the last chance, the final off-ramp, where restraint could still override consequence. No one took it. And as Ariana's thumb pressed down, the system responded instantly, silent and obedient, setting in motion a chain of events no apology could outrun. The insult had been delivered. The line had been crossed. And in the quiet that followed, the Halstead family lost something they would never get back. Not their reputation, not yet, their protection. The call connected on the first ring, not because Ariana Cole demanded speed, but because the people on the other end never let her wait. "Miss Cole," a calm voice answered. "We're ready." Ariana didn't raise her phone. She didn't turn away from the room. She didn't lower her voice to hide what was about to happen. She stood exactly where she was, wine-stained marble beneath her heels, history watching from stone pedestals, and spoke with the same tone she used in boardrooms where billions moved without ceremony. "Yes," she said. "Proceed." The word was simple, final. Across the hall, no one reacted. They expected shouting, drama, a threat delivered for effect. Instead, Ariana's stillness unsettled them more than any outburst could have. Richard Halstead felt the shift before he understood it. His phone vibrated again, then a third time short, sharp pulses that felt less like notifications and more like warnings. He ignored them, eyes fixed on Ariana, searching her face for a clue that this was still a bluff. Margaret scoffed. "This is absurd," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Do you know how many people threaten us every year?" Ariana finally looked at her. "I'm not threatening you," she replied. "I'm informing my team." On the other end of the line, Ariana's general counsel waited pen poised, documents already staged. The structure was precise. Layered terminations, cascading withdrawals, automated compliance flags designed to activate the moment authorization was given. "Confirm scope," the voice requested. Ariana didn't hesitate. Terminate the entire $5.9 billion structure, she said. Effective immediately. There it was. No emphasis, no raised volume, just truth, released. A few people in the crowd laughed softly, nervously. Someone muttered, "Shay's bluffing." Another whispered, "That number sounds real." Richard's breath caught. "Miss Cole," the voice on the line said carefully, "professionally, that includes the Halstead refinancing, associated credit facilities, bridge agreements, and contingent guarantees." "Yes," Ariana replied. "All of it." A pause. "Not doubt procedure." "And to confirm," the voice continued, "this action will trigger lender notifications, rating disclosures, and immediate liquidity reassessment." "Understood," Ariana said. "That's the point." The silence that followed was not empty. It was loaded. Margaret's smile faltered. "Richard," she said, still laughing, "tell her to stop this nonsense." But Richard wasn't listening anymore. He was staring at his phone now at the message that had just come through from his CFO. 3 words. "No pleasantries." They pulled out. Another alert followed. "Bank freeze pending review." Another. "Emergency board call now." The room felt suddenly smaller. The chandeliers harsher. The statues less forgiving. Ariana ended the call with a single tap. "It's done," she said quietly. Margaret blinked. "What is?" Ariana didn't answer her right away. She scanned the room one last time, the donors who had laughed, the executives who had filmed, the board members who had said nothing. She met Richard's eyes again, and this time, there was no ambiguity left. "You just lost your lifeline," Ariana said. "Not because of numbers, because of behavior." Richard's face drained of color. "You don't understand," he said hoarsely. "That deal, it keeps everything afloat." "I understand perfectly," Ariana replied. "That's why I canceled it." Phones began to ring across the hall now. Not cameras calls. Real ones. The kind no one ignores. Margaret took a step back. "This is impossible," she said. "You don't have that kind of authority." Ariana finally allowed herself a fraction of honesty. "I do," she said, "and I always did." The laughter was gone now, replaced by a creeping awareness that something irrevocable had just occurred quietly, efficiently, without spectacle. The gala hadn't been interrupted. It had been overwritten, and while the crowd stood frozen beneath borrowed grandeur, the systems that sustained the Halstead empire were already shutting down, line by line, contract by contract, obeying a command that could never be undone. Cancel everything. And just like that, everything was canceled. The room did not erupt. It hollowed out. At first, the collapse announced itself quietly through vibrations instead of voices. Phones buzzed on marble tables. Smartwatches lit wrists mid-toast. A donor near the back glanced down, frowned, then checked again as if the message might change if he stared hard enough. It didn't. Richard Halstead's phone rang. Not a polite ringtone. Not a social call. A direct line reserved for emergencies he had spent years pretending would never come. He answered without greeting. "Yes," he said. Silence stretched on the other end, then a voice stripped of ceremony. "The banks have suspended the draw," his CFO said. "All of them." Richard closed his eyes for half a second, the way people do when bracing for impact. "That's not possible." "It is," the voice replied. The trigger clauses activated. Cole Global's withdrawal set off the compliance chain. Credit lines are frozen pending review. Another pause, shorter this time. "We don't have liquidity past 48 hours. Richard lowered the phone slowly, his hand trembling despite himself. Around him, the gala continued its motions, waiters moving, glasses clinking, but the sound felt artificial now, like music playing after the power had already gone out. Margaret was still speaking. "This has gone far enough," she said sharply, addressing no one in particular. "Security, clear the room around her." "I will not." Her own phone buzzed. She ignored it. Then it buzzed again, and again. Annoyed, she snapped it open. The color drained from her face. The message was brief, unadorned. Emergency board meeting. Attendance mandatory. Another followed. Donors withdrawing. Press inquiries escalating. Margaret looked up, confused. "Richard," she said, "what is happening?" He didn't answer. He was staring at Ariana now, not with anger, not even with fear, but with the dawning horror of recognition. He finally understood the scale of the mistake they had made, not just tonight, over decades. The crowd sensed it too. A murmur spread low, unsettled. Someone whispered, "The deal collapsed." Another asked, "Which deal?" A third replied, "All of it." Phones that had once been raised to film humiliation were now pressed to ears. People stepped away from the Halsteads instinctively, as if failure were contagious. Chairs shifted. Distance formed. A board member excused himself abruptly. A donor followed. Then another. Margaret reached for control like a reflex. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, her voice too loud now. "Everyone, please," Ariana spoke without raising her voice. "It's not," she said. The room went still again. "This is what happens," Ariana continued, "when systems are built on the assumption that power will never be questioned." Richard swallowed. "You've destroyed us," he said, barely audible. Ariana met his gaze. "No," she replied. "I stopped protecting you." Another phone rang, then another. The sound multiplied, echoing through the hall like an alarm no one had programmed, but everyone understood. The statues watched in silence. The chandeliers burned steadily overhead, and beneath them, the Halstead empire began to collapse not with fire or spectacle, but with the quiet precision of contracts dissolving, confidence evaporating, and doors closing all at once. The gala had not ended, but the Halsteads' reign had, and everyone in that room knew it because they could feel the ground shifting beneath a family that had finally run out of places to stand. The truth arrived without fanfare. No spotlight. No announcement. Just a name spoken clearly enough to end the room. Ariana stepped forward, not to claim space, but to settle it. "My name is Ariana Cole," she said. The words didn't echo, yet they landed everywhere at once. A few heads tilted, a few brows furrowed. Somewhere near the back, a man stopped mid-text. The name moved through the room like a delayed reaction, quiet at first, then accelerating as recognition caught up with consequence. Richard Halstead froze. The puzzle pieces aligned too fast to stop. Cole. Cole Global. The unsigned approvals. The final authority clause head skimmed past, confident it would never matter. Margaret laughed once, sharp and brittle. "That means nothing," she said. "I've never heard of you." Ariana didn't look at her. "That's not surprising," she replied calmly. "You weren't meant to." She turned slightly, addressing the room now not to impress, not to threaten, but to clarify. "I'm the founder and CEO of Cole Global Capital. We manage long-term restructuring and liquidity stabilization for firms whose public image outlives their balance sheets." A hush fell. Someone near the donors' table inhaled sharply. Another whispered, "Cole Global," as if saying the name too loudly might make it real. Ariana continued, "6 months ago, my firm was approached to underwrite a $5.9 billion refinancing for Halstead Holdings. The objective was simple: keep the company solvent without announcing that it was already failing." Margaret's face tightened. "This is a lie." Richard found his voice at last. "Margaret," he said hoarsely, "it isn't." He turned to Ariana, desperation finally visible. "You could have said who you were," he pleaded. If we'd known, Ariana met his gaze, unwavering. "That's the point," she said. "You didn't need to know who I was to treat me with basic dignity." The words cut deeper than any accusation. Around them, the crowd shifted again, not away from Ariana this time, but from the Halsteads. Distance grew where loyalty had once been assumed. Phones lowered, smiles vanished. Margaret shook her head, refusing reality. "This is extortion," she snapped. "You humiliated us on purpose." "No," Ariana replied. "You humiliated yourselves. I simply removed the cushion." She gestured subtly toward the statues lining the hall. "Places like this survive on the illusion that power is inherited and permanent. It isn't. It's conditional." A donor near the front swallowed hard. A board member stared at the floor. The room was listening now, not as spectators, but as witnesses. "The deal was contingent," Ariana continued, voice steady. "Not just on financial performance, but on governance, conduct, risk." She looked directly at Margaret for the first time. "You failed the last one." Margaret's composure finally cracked. "You can't do this," she whispered. "You'll ruin us." Ariana's response was quiet, almost gentle. "You were already ruined," she said. "I just stopped pretending you weren't." Richard took a step forward, then stopped. He looked older now, smaller, the weight of decades pressed into a single moment of clarity. "Please," he said, "reconsider. We can fix this." Ariana shook her head once. "There are things money can repair," she said. "Character isn't one of them." The silence that followed was absolute. No laughter, no whispers, no cameras. Only the sound of a dynasty realizing too late that it had mistaken immunity for entitlement and silence for safety. Ariana adjusted the strap of her gown, the yellow fabric bright against the dimming room. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply concluded, "This evening was meant to celebrate generosity," she said. Instead, it exposed its absence. She turned away then, not because the moment was finished, but because her role in it was. Behind her, Margaret Halstead stood motionless, diamonds trembling against her throat. Richard Halstead stared into nothing, hearing doors close he could not see. And the room, once so eager to watch a humiliation, now understood the full cost of having applauded the wrong one. The reveal was complete. What followed would not be loud, but it would be final. Ariana Cole left the hall the same way she had entered it, without ceremony. Behind her, the gala unraveled in slow motion. Donors checked their phones and quietly excused themselves. Board members avoided eye contact. Conversations died unfinished. The chandeliers still burned bright, but the room no longer believed in itself. Margaret Halstead did not move. She stood frozen beneath her family's name, suddenly aware of how thin legacy became when stripped of protection. No amount of lace or diamonds could insulate her now. The rooms she once controlled would remember this night, and they would not be kind. Richard Halstead sank into a chair he had donated in his own name. The calls would continue. The headlines would follow. By morning, the empire would be dissected by people who had once smiled at him across tables just like this one. And Ariana? She stepped into the night air, the museum doors closing softly behind her. No press waited, no victory speech followed. She didn't need one. By dawn, the refinancing would be officially withdrawn. Lenders would reprice risk. Boards would restructure. Foundations would quietly change sponsors. The system would adjust efficiently, impersonally, exactly as designed. Justice, Ariana knew, didn't require anger. It required alignment. She paused at the top of the steps and glanced once at the building, at centuries of stone built to preserve power by pretending it was timeless. Then she turned away. Because dignity had never belonged to buildings or families or names carved into walls. It belonged to people. And anyone who forgot that truth eventually paid for it. Not with noise, but with everything.